New Year's Eve was brimming with laughter, music, and promises of a bright future. Marina's house was decked out with twinkling lights, colorful balloons, and a Christmas tree still adorned with ornaments, though the evening was about to take a turn no one could have predicted. Childhood friends had gathered, as they always did, to celebrate the end of one chapter and the start of another. The air was thick with a sense of renewal, but also carried a tinge of anticipation, as if everyone was waiting for something more. Among them was Lucas, the perpetual skeptic. He believed in little, found humor in much, but nothing could make him trust what he couldn't see with his own eyes. So, when Thais's phone buzzed and she smiled mysteriously, every gaze turned to her. "I found something," she said, holding up her phone, the screen glowing with a soft blue light. "Found what exactly?" Kyle asked playfully, though his curiosity was already piqued. "It's an app, a game or something," Thais replied, her smile growing a bit more enigmatic. "The guy who sent it to me said it's meant to count down to the best New Year's Eve of our lives." The best New Year's Eve of our lives? What is this? Another one of those dumb internet gimmicks. Lucas scoffed, though the intrigue in his eyes was hard to miss. "I don't know, but it seems interesting. Let's see where it goes," she said, her voice tinged with uncertainty. The others began to gather around her, some more curious, others skeptical, but somehow they all felt a subtle pull, as if this night held the potential for something extraordinary. It was a night of farewells and fresh starts, and this app, with its vague promise, seemed to carry an irresistible air of mystery. Thais, always the group's most spirited and adventurous, was the first to download the app. She tapped the screen, and before anyone could ask more questions, a countdown appeared. 12 hours. Get ready for the best new year of your life. "That's it," Lucas asked, eyeing the screen suspiciously. "And what exactly is supposed to happen, huh?" But there was no time for more questions. The app, offering no further explanation, began emitting a faint vibration, a sound so distant it was almost imperceptible, before going silent, leaving them with more questions than answers. What they didn't know was that this marked the beginning of something far greater, something already in motion beyond their awareness. The night carried on, but the atmosphere had shifted. The air felt heavier, as if the party was on the verge of transforming into something unknown. With the app installed and the countdown ticking, the group returned to their celebration. The laughter, the conversations, and the clinking glasses of champagne continued, but something in the room had undeniably changed. For some, the feeling of unease lingered in the background, subtle yet unmistakable, like a promise left unfulfilled. As the minutes ticked by, the music seemed to fade, its once lively rhythm swallowed by something larger. No one could quite put their finger on what was happening, but one thing was clear. The clock was counting down to something they were all about to discover. The party carried on in its frenetic pace, yet the air seemed out of sync with its usual energy. The music, once enveloping, now felt distant, muffled. Every laugh and word exchange between friends echoed faintly, like voices submerged underwater. It was unsettling, but no one could pinpoint what was causing the strange unease. Thais, still fascinated by the app, glanced at her phone. The screen now displayed 11 hours, 54 minutes, and 32 seconds. The countdown marched on, relentless. Yet as she stared, she couldn't help but notice something different. The atmosphere in the room felt darker, heavier. The lights seemed to flicker ever so slightly, just enough to make everyone sense that something was off without fully understanding why. I don't know, guys, but don't you feel like it's getting a little weird? Marina asked, her voice tinged with apprehension. She had been the most cheerful of the group earlier, but now she looked uneasy, as though the weight of an invisible presence was pressing down on them all. Kyle laughed, trying to break the tension. "It's just a booze, Marina. Maybe the party's getting in your head or something, like psychological vibes." But Lucas, the eternal skeptic, was staring intently at a distant corner of the room, as if trying to decipher what was happening. He noticed one of the shadows. Oddly, it seemed to grow with the light rather than shrink, twisting and shifting unnaturally. It wasn't just a lighting. There was something deeper, something he couldn't explain but felt inexplicably tied to Thais's app. "Hey, Thais, did you notice that?" Lucas asked, gesturing subtly toward the corner. Thais glanced at the spot he indicated, but saw nothing out of the ordinary. To her, the shadow seemed like any other part of the room. "It's just a light, Lucas. Chill out," she said, but her voice wavered, betraying her own growing uncertainty. The minutes dragged on, each one heavier than the last. The countdown on Thais's phone felt less like a harmless feature and more like an unyielding herald of something unknown. Now, even the others were starting to notice the strange details around them. People at the party seemed suddenly distant, like they were caught in a dream. Someone laughed, but the sound was muffled, as if it were coming from far away. The wall clock, ticking like every other clock in the house, began to behave oddly. Its seconds seemed to speed up, one turning into two, then three, as though time itself was accelerating toward a destination none of them could anticipate. Out of nowhere, Marina felt a shiver run down her spine. She glanced around the room, searching for a logical explanation for the growing sense of unease. Then, for a brief moment, her vision blurred. She saw the room as a whole, but it appeared hazy, like she was peering through a dense fog. Her body stiffened. It felt as if she were witnessing her own death, not in vivid detail, but as an oppressive, inevitable sensation. The impression was so overwhelming that she blinked several times, trying to shake it off. When the fog finally lifted, she took a deep breath and looked at her friends, struggling to push aside the mounting fear. I don't know what's happening, but I'm starting to get scared," Marina admitted, her voice trembling. "Relax, Marina," Kyle replied, though his discomfort was evident. "It's just the app messing with us. Some kind of psychological trick. Nothing serious." But his words didn't have the calming effect he'd hoped for. The tension in the room was palpable, and every one of them was feeling increasingly out of sorts. The sensation that something was deeply wrong was intensifying, impossible to ignore no matter how much they tried to rationalize it. Suddenly, Thais's phone vibrated again. She looked at the screen, which now displayed 11 hours 45 minutes and 12 seconds. But something was different. The number seemed sharper, more vivid, and the countdown appeared to be moving faster. Next to it, a small, trembling message appeared. "Prepare yourself. Time is no longer yours." A chill ran down her spine. She glanced up, hoping for a reaction from her friends, but what she saw instead was blank stares. Their faces were distant, as if they weren't fully present anymore. Panic began to bubble inside her, but she clung to logic, trying to rationalize the situation. "Maybe it's just a trick," she murmured under her breath, though doubt and fear were taking hold. The room was undeniably darker now. The music had stopped several minutes ago, but no one seemed to have noticed. The shadows in the corners had grown, more defined, stretching and shifting with a life of their own. The muffled noise of the party had given way to an eerie, unsettling silence. What had started as a casual countdown was now the ominous centerpiece of something far larger and far more sinister. It was only a matter of time before everyone realized this New Year's Eve wasn't just a celebration. It was the beginning of something terrifying. The air felt heavy with an unnatural stillness. The music was gone, but nobody seemed aware of its absence. People moved about the room, but their movements were stiff, mechanical, like they were caught in a trance. Thais scanned the faces of her friends, desperate for some kind of reaction, any sign of awareness. But their eyes were vacant, staring into nothingness. Kaio's smile looked forced, and Marina's gaze was locked on a fixed point, as though she wasn't seeing anything at all. The party had lost the spark that once made it feel alive. Whatever was happening, it was no longer just in their heads. It was real, and it was growing. Thais's phone vibrated again, pulling her out of her spiraling thoughts. The screen now read 11 hours, 37 minutes, and 9 seconds, and beneath the countdown, the same message appeared, sharper and more unnerving this time. Time is no longer yours. A wave of urgency swept over her. Something was happening. Something she couldn't explain, but that was becoming increasingly impossible to ignore. She took a step back, as if trying to distance herself from an invisible force, when suddenly a vivid vision struck her like a bolt of electricity. It was a startlingly clear image. She saw herself alone in a dark room, the walls closing in around her. A shadowy figure moved closer, accompanied by the sound of heavy breathing that seemed to fill her ears. Thais tried to scream, but no sound came out. The figure kept advancing, and she felt as if she were being consumed by the surrounding darkness. A cold, paralyzing fear gripped her entire being. Then, just as abruptly as it had appeared, the vision vanished, leaving her dizzy and gasping for air. She blinked, trying to ground herself, but the terror had already taken hold. Whatever she had just experienced didn't feel like a mere nightmare. It felt like a glimpse of what was to come, a forewarning of an inevitable event. Thais scanned the room, searching for something familiar to hold on to, but the mounting tension in the air only grew thicker. It was as if the world itself was teetering on the edge of breaking apart. "Thais, are you okay?" Lucas's voice broke through the heavy silence. His gaze was sharper now, more alert, though there was an undeniable edge of unease in his tone. I don't know, Lucas," she stammered, her voice shaking. "I just saw something terrifying. It's probably just a nightmare," he said, trying to sound reassuring, though his own apprehension was obvious. "That app must be messing with our heads. It's got to be some kind of mind trick." But Thais knew it wasn't just that. The oppressive wrongness in the room had wrapped itself around everyone now. The shadows on the walls seemed more defined, stretching unnaturally as if reaching out to consume everything in their path. The air itself felt dense, laden with an unseen pressure. Suddenly, Marina's vision wavered, her eyes locking onto the center of the room. Her voice trembled as she muttered, I'm seeing things. There's something there in the middle of the room. It's moving." The others followed Marina's gaze, but nothing appeared to be there, or at least, nothing visible under normal light. Yet the space she pointed to seemed wrong, a void expanding outward, as if something was trying to push through. For a fleeting moment, the void pulsed, distorting the air around it, and it felt like the fabric of reality itself was being stretched thin. But when they focused harder, the illusion dissipated, leaving the space empty once more. Still, none of them could shake the feeling that they were no longer alone, and that whatever was trying to emerge wasn't finished yet. "Marina, are you okay?" "I think you're letting this app get to you," said Kaio, trying to mask his own unease. But Marina couldn't tear her gaze away from the void. "It's not paranoia, Kaio. I clearly saw something there." The silence that followed was suffocating. The room felt heavier with each passing second. Suddenly, Thais's phone vibrated again. When she looked at the screen, her heart nearly stopped. The countdown now read 11 hours, 30 minutes, and 1 second, and beneath it a new message appeared. "You can't turn back now." She had no idea what it meant, but the feeling that they were being drawn into something irreversible intensified. The pressure in the air was nearly unbearable, and her friends looked more unsettled by the moment. They exchanged glances, but no one knew what to say. The shadows, once small and subtle, now loomed larger and more oppressive, and that's when Lucas saw it. He couldn't tell if it was a vision, a hallucination, or something else entirely, but he saw himself, standing frozen in the center of the room, his eyes wide with terror. Next to him stood a hooded figure, cloaked entirely in black. exuding an unnatural presence. The figure reached out a hand, and Lucas watched as his own reflection crumpled beneath the touch, drained of all life and energy. He tried to scream, but no sound came. The figure withdrew, and Lucas's body fell lifeless to the floor. Then he blinked, and it was gone, but the terror remained. "Lucas, you're pale. What happened?" Kaio asked, his concern genuine, breaking through his usual bravado. Lucas couldn't answer. He was too shaken, his mind reeling. What he had just witnessed wasn't a hallucination. He knew it wasn't. It was real. Something he was fated to face. "Something's wrong, Kaio," Lucas finally said, his voice hoarse. "This is getting worse with every minute. I saw my death. And the worst part is, I don't think I'm the only one. I think we're all seeing something, whether we want to admit it or not." Before anyone could respond, Thais's phone buzzed again. She glanced at the screen, her spine tingling as she read the message. "The end is near. Prepare yourselves." The countdown was ticking away, and with every second that passed, it felt as though another piece of their lives was slipping away. The darkness in the room began to expand, swallowing what little light remained. The air had grown unbearably thick, as if the room itself was suffocating. Thais, Lucas, Kaio, and Marina could feel the weight pressing down on them, almost crushing. The shadowy figures along the walls moved faster now, more erratically, as if sensing that something inevitable was drawing near. The room, once vibrant and alive, was now unrecognizable. It had become a claustrophobic void, devoid of joy or warmth, a hollow space filled with an oppressive, chilling stillness. Thais, still overwhelmed with fear and adrenaline, stared at the shattered phone lying on the ground. The screen was completely dark, its once ominous countdown extinguished. For the first time in what felt like hours, the oppressive weight in the air began to lift, and the chilling cold that had seeped into their bones started to dissipate. The others looked around, their breaths uneven, as if they had just surfaced from drowning. "Did it work?" Marina asked hesitantly, her voice trembling. I don't know," Thais whispered, staring at the broken fragments. She felt a faint flicker of relief, but couldn't ignore the gnawing uncertainty clawing at the back of her mind. Lucas stepped forward cautiously, his eyes scanning the room for any lingering signs of the shadows. The dark figures that had once loomed and stretched now stood still, their movement arrested. The center of the room, which had seemed like a void moments ago, now appeared normal, empty, but not unnatural. "It's quiet," Lucas said, almost to himself. "Too quiet." Kaio crossed his arms, still visibly shaken, but trying to mask his fear. Maybe the app was the cause of all this. Destroying the phone must have stopped whatever was happening. Or paused it, Lucas muttered darkly. Before anyone could respond, a low, almost imperceptible hum began to emanate from the broken phone. It was faint, but it sent shivers down their spines. Thais instinctively stepped back, her eyes wide with terror. No, she stammered. The pieces of the phone on the floor began to tremble, vibrating slightly as if something inside them was still alive. The darkness that had receded now seemed to gather again, coalescing around the shattered fragments. Slowly, a new message began to form on the broken screen, the letters flickering like dying embers. "You thought you could stop it," Marina gasped, covering her mouth with trembling hands. Kaio took a step forward, instinctively reaching for the pieces, but Lucas grabbed his arm. "Don't," Lucas said firmly. "This isn't over." The hum grew louder, and the fragments began to rise, suspended in the air as though held by invisible strings. The room darkened once more, the oppressive weight returning with even greater force. The countdown reappeared on the fractured screen, picking up where it had left off. 11 hours, 9 minutes, and 30 seconds. Thais fell to her knees, her hands clutching her head. "What do we do? What else can we do?" she cried, her voice cracking under the strain. Lucas clenched his fists, his jaw tight. We end this. Not just a phone. Whatever this is, whatever's controlling it. It's not just an app. It's something else. Something bigger. How? Kyle asked, his voice edged with panic. We don't even know what it is. The hum transformed into a low, menacing growl that seemed to resonate from every corner of the room. The shadows began to move again, this time more deliberately, converging in the center of the space. Lucas took a deep breath, steeling himself. We'll have to face it, whatever it is. No more running, no more waiting. If we don't, it'll consume us all. The group exchanged terrified glances. The countdown on the broken phone continued its relentless march, each second a haunting reminder that time was slipping away, and with it, their last chance to escape the darkness closing in. Then, a soft and distant voice echoed in everyone's minds. It wasn't the voice of a person, but a presence, an entity that seemed to speak directly to their souls. You cannot escape what has already been written. The shadowy figure slowly dissolved, as though time itself was finally setting things right. The room, once consumed by darkness, began to regain its colors, but in a distorted way, as if they were seeing the world through a veil. The party, which had once been a place of joy and celebration, now resembled a ghostly, empty, and unrecognizable scene. Is this a dream? Are we dreaming? Kyle asked, his voice filled with doubt. This can't be real. But before anyone could answer, Thais's completely shattered phone emitted a faint sound, like a distant crackle. The screen, which should have been dead, flickered one last time and a new message appeared. The cycle cannot be broken. What is meant to happen will happen. The friends fell silent. The fear had momentarily dissipated, but a feeling of helplessness took its place. They had destroyed the app, yet they still weren't free. What did this mean? Were they once again trapped in the same fate? Or had something changed? The shadowy figure, now transformed into a vortex of light and darkness, dissipated completely, leaving behind an absolute void. There was no more countdown, no more oppressive shadows, but the sense that the cycle might begin again hung in the air. It feels like we've reached the end, but it doesn't feel resolved, Lucas began, his voice tinged with uncertainty. Maybe it was never meant to be resolved, Thais said, her eyes fixed on the shattered phone pieces on the floor. Maybe we were destined to live through this all along, even with the overwhelming sense of defeat. Something within them, perhaps a spark of hope or a remnant of their humanity, compelled them to keep looking at one another. Their fate was sealed, but the cycle had been broken in some way, and what would happen next remained an enigma. The clock on the wall, which had been stopped for so long, suddenly ticked once. And with that, the room seemed to return to normal, or perhaps not, because now, more than ever, they understood that time, true time, was something beyond their control. The countdown had already ended. The end, now, was a new beginning. The clock on the wall continued to mark the time, but the sense that something deeper was at play didn't disappear. The room, once consumed by darkness, now presented an unsettling stillness, almost as if it were in wait, expecting something. Even with the app destroyed, the feeling of being trapped in an endless cycle still lingered over the group, like a constant shadow. Fear had momentarily dissipated, but uncertainty remained, more palpable than ever. Did we make it? Marina asked, her voice trembling but full of hope. Thais, still with her eyes fixed on the pieces of the phone scattered across the floor, didn't know how to respond. Whatever had happened, whatever they had just experienced, it felt more like an illusion, a trap, or a cruel lesson than a true victory. I don't know, Marina. I really don't, Thais replied with a deep sigh. We destroyed the app, yes, but that final message, it wasn't a relief. We didn't feel a true escape or a solution. Lucas looked at the rest of the group, and something in his gaze had changed. There was a weight, a deeper understanding of what they had been through, or perhaps of what had been lost. I saw our death, but I didn't see the end of it, he said, his voice heavy. The app may have disappeared, but what about us? Where are we now? Could its destruction have been just part of a bigger cycle we don't even understand? The room seemed to stretch and contract at once, as if the very boundaries of reality were being challenged. Suddenly, a growing sense of discomfort began to envelop them all again, as if something was still to come, something they couldn't see, but that was drawing near. Thais's broken phone, now just a useless shell of glass and circuits, began to glow faintly and intermittently. A strange sound started to emit from it, like a frequency that left them anxious and distracted. It was as if, even destroyed, the app was still somehow alive, trying to communicate with them in a way they couldn't understand. This is impossible, Kyle whispered, staring at the phone. It can't be. Then, the phone suddenly lit up completely, and a new message appeared on the cracked screen. The end is not the end. The cycle is just beginning. A wave of panic swept over the friends. The cruel truth they had begun to understand was confirmed in that moment. The feeling that they were in a game, in a kind of maze with no exit, was more real than ever. What does this mean? Marina asked, but the answer seemed to get lost in the void of the room. The screen flickered once more, and this time, the message changed quickly. A succession of words and phrases that seemed to scramble as if being spoken by a discordant, distorted voice. You cannot escape your essence. The cycle was never about time, but about the destiny that unites you. Every choice you make, every action you take, puts you on a path where the end never comes. You are the pieces in a larger game. The last sentence echoed in their minds like a muffled scream. You are the pieces in a larger game. These simple yet enigmatic words repeated in the friends' heads like a mantra. We're trapped in something much bigger than we imagined, Lucas said, his expression distant. The app wasn't the problem. The problem was always what it represented. What connects us to this? We're just playing a role in a game we can't even see. The fear, which until then had given way to a temporary sense of relief, returned with overwhelming intensity. What was happening made no logical sense. It was as if their very fate was tied to a higher force, one they couldn't even control. Thais felt a chill run down her spine. She looked at the others, but there were no answers left to give, only a dark understanding that maybe time and destiny weren't what they thought they were. The app, the shadows, the countdown, it was all part of something much deeper. We're being manipulated, like pieces on a board that was never meant to be won. But even in the face of all the darkness surrounding them, there was a spark of resistance that ignited inside them, something that, despite all the manipulation, still kept them united. A fight to not accept the inevitability of what seemed to be their destiny. Maybe we don't have control over what happens to us, Kyle said, his eyes fixed on Thais. But what we can do now is fight against it. We won't just be pieces of this game. No matter what happens, we won't give up. Marina nodded in agreement. Yes, maybe the cycle is eternal. Maybe the end will never come. But we can't let that define who we are. We need to find a way out. Somehow, it was a promise. A desperate fight against something larger than any of them could comprehend. Something beyond time, beyond shadows, beyond the fate that seemed to be an eternal prison. Deep down in their hearts, they knew they weren't alone, that somehow they were part of something that transcends the boundaries of time and reality. The countdown might have ended, but the game, as they had discovered, was far from over. The cycle began again, but this time there was a difference. They were aware of what they were facing, and with that awareness, perhaps it would be possible to break the true cycle, or at least fight against it with everything they still had left. The silence in the room seemed even heavier. The clock, which continued to mark time relentlessly, seemed to drag on, each second stretching as if it were mocking them. Thais' broken phone, now inert, continued to glow intermittently, like a tiny flame in the midst of a storm. The words from the last message echoed in their minds. You are the pieces in a larger game. What did this mean? Were they being watched by someone or something? And who? or what was playing this game. The questions began to pile up, heavier than the fear that had already consumed them as they tried unsuccessfully to understand exactly what was happening to their lives. But as terrifying as the idea was, that they were trapped in a game they didn't understand, there was a growing determination in each of them to challenge this imposed reality. It wouldn't be easy, and maybe it wouldn't even be possible, but the only thing left now was to resist. They knew they couldn't just wait for the inevitable to happen. What if the app wasn't the only thing responsible for this? Lucas asked, breaking the heavy silence. He still seemed distant, thoughtful, as if trying to piece together a puzzle that was impossible to complete. What if the cycle is something that existed before us? Something that started a long time ago and is using us as puppets? Marina looked at him, wide-eyed, trying to process what he was saying. Are you saying this isn't something that happened because of the app? That it's just a control tool? Yes, Lucas replied, his voice deep. The app didn't create us. It only connected us to what was already there. The cycle of destiny, the visions of our deaths, the fear, the sense of being unable to escape. All of that was already in motion long before we had a chance to act. The app brought us to it, but we're not the first to live this, and we won't be the last. Those words hit the group like a bomb. If everything they were experiencing was already part of a much larger game, then they were just another generation trapped by something invisible, something that transcends time and the limits of what they could understand. The cycle didn't begin or end with them. It was an eternal cycle, fueled by something beyond human comprehension. So, what should we do? Kaio asked, the anguish taking over his voice. If we're trapped in this game, what can we do to free ourselves? Thais felt the pressure of having to respond, but the truth was that she didn't know. Everything seemed so undefined, so aimless. They had destroyed the app, broken the countdown, but what had they gained from it? Nothing. The game continued. The shadows were still watching them. And now the sense that they were being manipulated by an invisible force was stronger than ever. I don't know, Thais said, her voice wavering. I thought destroying the app would be the key to everything. But it wasn't the problem. It was just the tip of the iceberg. What keeps us trapped is the cycle itself. Time, fate. We can't fight against what we don't understand. The word fate lingered in the air like a sentence. Were they really controlled by a force they couldn't challenge? Or were they just deceiving themselves, searching for answers where none existed? But then, something happened. Thais' phone, which had been motionless on the floor, began to vibrate, emitting a faint light, as if it was trying to communicate again. They watched with a mix of fear and hope, but this time, the glow seemed different. It wasn't just a cold, impersonal light, but something deeper, as if emanating from a place of knowledge or power. The cracked screen, as if regenerating, began to display another message. The game is not about time. The game is about choice. Each of you is trapped in a cycle, but you are not without power. Fate is not immutable. Choice? Murmured Kaio, with a mix of disbelief and skepticism. So, what does this mean? What can we do with this? The answer came almost instantly, as if the app itself was testing their limits, challenging them to comprehend what was happening. The choice is before you. Break the cycle, and what was lost will be restored. But the price will be high. The air seemed to have become denser. The shadows, which had been scattered, now seemed to draw closer, more intense and more threatening. The room began to tremble slightly, as if an invisible force was taking over the space. Restore what was lost, Thais repeated, trying to understand the message. What does that mean? What have we lost? What can we gain? The tension increased, and the answer seemed to linger in the air, ready to be revealed. And then, once again, the voice that seemed to come from somewhere distant and profound echoed in their minds, full of gravity. The cycle cannot be broken without sacrifice. What was taken from you will be returned, but something of equal value must be given. The choice is yours. The game was never only about survival. Fear took over the group, and for a moment, no one said a word. The sacrifice. They had been tested the entire time, and now, the final choice stood before them. The price of freedom. What were they willing to lose in order to finally escape this unbreakable cycle? Marina looked at her friends, her breath short. What if the choice is our lives? What happens if we choose to continue? We don't know, Thais replied, her gaze determined, though her eyes were filled with doubt. But we have to decide, now. We don't have time left. The cycle was about to reach its climax, and the final choice was in their hands. The room seemed to freeze. The air was thick, dense with the tension enveloping them. The app's message echoed in their minds like a persistent reverberation. The cycle cannot be broken without sacrifice. What was taken from you will be returned, but something of equal value must be given. The choice is yours. The game was never only about survival. Each word seemed to resonate with a chilling depth, a cruel and inescapable truth. They were faced with a choice, and they knew that any decision they made could change their lives forever, or perhaps end them all. Kaio was the first to break the silence, his voice trembling, but filled with growing desperation. What have we lost? What has already been taken from us? The answer seemed to hang in the air, invisible, as if time itself was pausing, waiting to see what they would do. They had lived every second of that night as if it were their last, and now they faced a truth they never imagined. Whatever was happening wasn't just a sequence of events, but something extending beyond space and time, a game that involved not only their lives but their souls. Lucas looked at the others, his eyes clouded with anxiety and fear. Maybe what we've lost is more than just time. Maybe it's our essence, our humanity, every moment we've lived in this cycle, every vision of our deaths. Maybe it's all pulled us further away from who we really are. Yes, Thais said, her voice low and filled with anguish. All of this, the countdown, the game. Maybe what we've lost is our own freedom, the freedom to make our own choices, to live without this curse hanging over our heads. The sacrifice, it might be something much bigger than we imagined. The phone continued to glow, now almost supernatural, as if waiting for them to make a decision. The screen lit up and faded in rhythm, like a heartbeat, as if it was waiting, testing their limits. Marina stepped forward, her eyes steady but filled with uncertainty. What if the sacrifice is more than an object or a person? What if the sacrifice is our very destiny? What happens if we choose to move forward, ignoring the threat, rejecting the game? The idea was tempting. Who, in their right mind, would willingly surrender to such a cruel game, where destiny was manipulated by forces beyond their control? Who would choose to be a piece on an invisible board, controlled by something or someone they didn't even understand? We can't keep running this risk, Kaio said, with a controlled fury. If this choice is ours, then we need to be more than passive players. We need to take control and face what's being forced upon us. Thais nodded slowly, feeling the weight of responsibility as the leader of the group, but also the heavy doubt that clung to her heart. It's a hard choice. Maybe the only way forward is to sacrifice what's been lost to restore what we can still save. What we truly want isn't more time or safety, it's freedom. The freedom to choose our own destiny. But what if that freedom comes at an unbearable cost? Lucas questioned, the unease in his voice reflecting the gravity of the situation. What if the price is our very identity, or the future of those we love? The dilemma seemed unsolvable. It was as if they were trapped in a maze with no way out, each door leading to a new nightmare. And yet, deep down, they all knew the final choice was there, within their reach, waiting to be made. Maybe the real choice is this, Marina said, her words more serene, but no less terrifying. Choosing who we want to be, even knowing we can't escape who we've already been. What if, in the end, we decide not to sacrifice anymore? What if we refuse to continue this cycle and simply choose to be free? Those words resonated in their minds, and for a moment, everything seemed to make sense. What they were facing was more than just a fight to escape fate. It was about reclaiming the power of their own choices. even knowing the future might be uncertain, even terrifying. Suddenly, Thais' phone flickered again, emitting a brighter, more urgent light. They felt the pressure mount, as if time was tightening around them, ready to run out. A final message appeared on the broken screen. The choice has been given. The game ends when you decide it ends. But remember, everything has a price. What is chosen cannot be undone. The phone's light suddenly went out. The sounds of the world around them seemed to intensify. The beating of their hearts, the suffocating air that felt impenetrable. They were about to make the final choice, and they knew that whatever they decided would change the course of their lives forever. The weight of the decision was overwhelming, but there was no more time to hesitate. Thais lifted her eyes to the others, a flame of determination burning in her chest. We can no longer be prisoners of something we don't control. We have the power to choose. Let's break the cycle, and if the price is our freedom, then let it be paid. She took a step forward, feeling the weight of the decision pulse through her veins. They were made to make this choice, to break the game, no matter the cost. We're in this together, Kaio said, his voice firm. And together, we'll make this decision. Let's end the game, once and for all. They joined hands, a final act of resistance against what had manipulated them up until that point. The cycle, with all its shadows and countdowns, was about to be broken. But what would come next? The answer lay beyond them, beyond anything they could imagine. The end, or perhaps the beginning, was finally in their hands. And the game, like all games, came to its end.